Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the deep dive into SiD Reports session. I am Jenny Schlukebier from SiD Support, and my partner here is Mary. Go ahead, Mary.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to our session. I'm like the talking head. I'll be doing all the talking and guiding you through this, and Mary is over there in chat answering questions, helping people, putting in links if we have any. So we do this as a team, and so we'll just get going. I'm going to turn off my camera just as we present here. So again, if you do have questions, feel free to chat them in. And if I see them and they're super relevant to the screen I'm on, I might answer them in live. Otherwise, we will have time at the end for questions. So feel free. And then, of course, you can always contact us if it's something comes to you that you would like to ask and maybe you want to ask later. Our email is sidsupport@literacymn.org. It'll be on the last slide as well. But when I say that's our email, it's because Mary and I, it's the support email. And so we both get those and then we try to get back to people very quickly. So again, welcome to Deep Dive into SiD Reports. And I did do a similar session within another session at Summer Institute. So if you were there, you might be familiar with some of this stuff. But one thing I like to do is build in some time in these sessions so you guys can run some of the reports and look at what you got, maybe talk a little bit about it. Like I say, when you're at a session like this, you're away from your office. Well, you might be in your office, but mentally you're kind of away from your office. It's a good time to just kind of play around with stuff you might not give yourself time to do otherwise. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. So if you should all be familiar with SiD, and in SiD, when you log into SiD on the reports tab, this page is a long page of a list of about a gazillion reports. So our reports, we like to keep organized into different sort of themes. So our first section of reports is about attendance issues, counting hours and looking at classes and how many hours they have. The second section is outcomes. So that's going to be where your level gains are. We're going to look at a couple of those reports today. We've got reports about assessment, like histories and things. Other sections on our report tab are data cleanup, lists, mailing lists, that kind of thing. And on this little screenshot here, you can see we kind of cut the image in half because we just didn't have, that list of reports is huge. And highlighted on this image are the ones I'm going to talk about today. So we're focusing on a few in the attendance section, a few outcome reports, and some demographic reports. Okay, so we're going to start with something called a conversion rate report. We're going to look at the level gains, MSGs, a site 5-year attendance report, some program summary, some head counts, student traffic, and then a few that you find on other pages in SiD, not on the reports tab. So we're going to kind of like bounce around and see what kind of reports are out there. So the first one I wanted to talk about today is something we call the conversion rate report. And this is something that I worked with some MDE staff, Brandy in particular, because she used to run something when she was a program manager in Georgia, some reports she called it the conversion rate report because she takes a look at students, all her students, and then would start going through the process of, okay, now let me look at a subset of students. Like, for example, hey, Brandy, I see you chatted. I'm going to narrow it down, just look at my participants. Now I'm going to narrow this down more, and I'm going to look at just those who made it to 40 hours. Now I'm going to narrow my group down more, and I'm going to look at those who have 40 hours and a post-test. And so in her wording, she said that by the end, when she was looking at her final group, it was what she considered to be the sort of conversion rate. Who of all my students who walked in my door, how many converted into a student who was a participant with a post-test? And how many were a student with a post-test and a gain? So this report was designed to to allow you to do something like that. And then also it's very flexible. So you can look at probably other different groups of students that you might find interesting to narrow down. So, if you were to click on this report, what you get at the top, all these little filter areas. So this report looks quite similar to the level gain report. So if you do your annual reporting in August, of course, you've seen the level gain report, which lists all students by level. So in ABE level 1, we have 3 students, how many hours, how many average hours, how many have taken a post-test, how many have MSGs, et cetera. The level gain report looks very much like this. It has a few more columns, but we kind of cleaned it up for this one. And then we have some additional filters up here that you can select. So it has the typical filters like sites and subsites. It has the date range, which defaults to this program year. But one of the main differences is that it has this minimum hours and maximum hours here. And when you first run it, it's going to default to anyone who has minimum hours of 0. So basically anyone who has hours. And the max is a really high number that no one's going to hit. So this is going to be all your students. Okay, so that's enrollees, participants. So that's one big difference between this and the level gain report. The level gain report defaults to just participants. So students with 12 or more hours who also have a test. So that's kind of where one of the first initial ways you can narrow down this report and run it for different subsets is by using these minimum and maximum hours. This also has a toggle for all enrollees or just participants. So all enrollees are going to be people who maybe only have 10 or 5 hours, for example. The level gain report will never include those students. Well, you can adjust the hours on that, but and the big difference is if your student doesn't have a test yet, they're going to show up on this report under here with no NRS test. So that's different than the level gain report. And then you can select their post-test status. So you can have everybody, no matter whether they've taken a post-test or not. You can select only those who've had a post-test. And you can also select those who haven't had a post-test. So you can kind of play around with different subgroups of students. Okay. And then every time you update some of these filters, there's the view report button to the right, and you click view report and you run the report again, and then you can take a look at the report to see how different the results are. Okay, so if you were to run it, as I said, if you click on that now, you're going to default to all your enrollees. But you can, I think one thing that would probably be fun for you all to do during this first activity in a moment will be to then select those students with 40 plus hours only. So for that, you're going to put 40 in the minimum attendance hours. So you're going to type over that 0 and put in a 40 and then click view report. And then it's going to only show you the students who have 40 or more hours. If you run that, you can see, okay, what's their percent who have a post-test? When I'm narrowing it down just to my students with more than 40 hours, am I getting a higher post-test rate? Am I getting a higher level gain rate? And then another kind of curious, fun thing you can do is also look only at those with less than 12 hours or maybe less than 40 hours. And then to do that, you would adjust the maximum hours. So if you want to look for students who have less than 40 hours and that's it, you could put 0 as the minimum hours and then 40 as the maximum hours. Rerun the report and take a look at those numbers and see how they compare. So now we're jumping right in. We're going to do an activity right now. I'm going to have you open another tab in your browser, go to SiD, go to the report tab, and run this conversion rate report. I'd like you to run it 2 times. So you can consider the first time the default, your first time. That's going to be everybody, all your students. And then run it again and change some of the filters, like maybe just select participants only, or maybe just select those who have 40 plus hours and a post-test. And at that point, if you run that group, you're going to see you have pretty much higher level gains, I bet. So I'm going to give everyone, I said 3 minutes, so let's do that starting now. Although I always say that and I keep chatting a little bit, but go ahead. You can continue to hear me. Run the report once, take a look at your numbers, maybe jot some down, and then change some of your filters and run the report again. See how many, another thing that's interesting is how many students even is that different group. So if you run it for all your students and you have, say, 500 students, then you run it only for those with 40 and more hours, and you only have like 100 students. That's telling you something right off the bat. that only 100 of 500 students are sticking around to 40 hours. Now, of course, we're not even halfway through the year, but we're getting close to halfway through the year. So go ahead and do that and see what kind of things you see between the different reports based on the different filters you select. And I'm already down to about 2 minutes. And then come back and chat in your findings. And let us know what filters you selected. Oh, okay. Ana Luisa, good point. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. Yes, after you run that report, you can click the plus sign on the level right here. The plus sign on the level, and it's going to show you the students who are in that category. So if you really narrow it down to something like students with like 100 hours but no post-test, and hopefully that's not very many students, but then you can click the plus sign and see who those students are so you can target them for testing. Great. All right, well, let's move on. Another report that we have a few additional filters on there that people had requested. And so hopefully you can find these to be useful, which is we have a report called the Level Gain, MSGs, and Post-Test: Demographics. So you probably are familiar with the Level Gain MSG Post-Test report, which is something that hopefully you're running fairly regularly in your program. That's going to show you, again, all the students in the different level categories, their MSGs, their multiple measurable skill gains. The first one is based on their testing, how many have diploma, how many got GED, and then these 3 new MSGs. And then overall, how many students have an MSG and what your percentage of MSG gains is. Okay, so that's pretty typical report. So then we have the one that's for demographics, and similar to the previous report, there's all these filters up here. So you can run this for subsets of groups. You can select the gender options, the age ranges, which I don't have them in front of me right now, but there's a couple different age range categories. The education level, which is the level that these students, when you ask at intake, their education level. So if you do want to compare students who have like a really, maybe students who have a diploma but no, or I'm sorry, like made it through the end of high school but no diploma, and you want to compare those to students with a lower level education, just to see, compare their average hours, gains, what levels they're in. We have race, ethnicity categories, country of birth. So we just made that narrow between US or non-US, and then the education location, where they had their formal education. So similar to the other report, you can run this, you'll default it. Now this one is a level gain report, and it's gonna default to just participants with 12 or more hours. You don't even have an hour filter on here. So it's only gonna be your participants. And then you can run it a second time by selecting one of these toggles or more. You could select 2 toggles. You could do females of a certain race, ethnicity, or something. Now, just word of warning, depending on the size of your program, if you start toggling and you might get down to a really low number of students. So if I want to look at just my females who are, or women who are, 25 to 40 or whatever the age range is, I might have a really small group. And then if I'm trying to compare level gains compared to another group, an older group or something, you have to take that with a word of caution, that you're only comparing small numbers to each other. But it is a nice way to maybe drill down to different subgroups of students. Okay, so we're going to do an activity on this one as well. So sorry, another screen image. So here's an image of where I selected males of the age range 25 to 44. And then when you run that report, just keep your eye here, because this lists out what of the filters that you had selected. So if you're going to run, say, for example, this subgroup, and then you want to compare it to females or a different age range, you can print this up. It tells you what filters you had selected, and then you can run the other one. And then you've got to have two different numbers that you can compare. So we're going to do an activity again. So run off. And I'm going to just give you 2 minutes this time, even though it says 3. So go ahead and go run that report. Again, the default will be all your participants. And then run it 2 or 3 more times using some of those filters to drill down into a smaller subgroup of students. Okay, so go to SiD.
Jenny, do you want them to run the level gains with or without the demographic?
Oh, I highlighted the wrong one. We want the one with the demographics.
Yeah.
So then you can select different subgroups within your program and maybe do some comparisons and see where maybe some focusing of services might need to go, or who your students are, help you see which groups of students you have in your program. So go ahead and do that and come back. And we're down to 1 minute left. Okay, down to 20 seconds. Did anybody run this report? Did you find anything useful? Okay. I have a chat. It's a private chat to me, but I'm just going to say the answer, which is that they're new. Someone who is new to SiD and programming, and they want to know where to go to run the reports. So when you are in SiD, I'm going to do a quick, when you are in SiD, your login screen looks like this, and you have your program. And then across the top are all these menu items, and you click the Reports tab. Oops, I haven't logged in for a few minutes. On the Reports tab is your big long list of reports. And so the level gains are in the second section, Outcome Reports, level gains, and the demographics one is right here. So that's where the reports are. All right, anybody else? Did anybody run any reports? Were you able to successfully kind of drill down to a subgroup? Any luck out there drilling down to a subgroup of students, maybe by age range or education level or country of birth? Okay, got a quiet group today. That's all right. Okay, we're going to move on to some other reports that we hope you can find useful. Okay, Rachel said, I noticed that with demographics, I could pull for the school versus the other level gains where I could look by class. Okay, I think for this demographic one, I limited the number of filters because it really gets kind of crazy when there's too many filters on there. So you're right. I did have the whole site and the subsite, but we didn't have class. And also class is always going to be a small number of students. So if you were going to try to just look at certain subsets of students within a class, it's not going to be probably very useful information. You're going to be looking at 2 or 3 students. So that's why we kept the class filter off that report. But that was something great you observed and a good question. You'd find it helpful it only included currently active students. That is a great point. It's hard to know who's active the way our students come and go. But I'm going to write that note down because that could be maybe interesting for other reports about tests and you want to narrow down and find students who need to test, you only want to focus on those who are still currently active. So the assessment history report does only look at currently active students, I believe. But you're right, this level gain one doesn't. But let me note that as something interesting. Great. Good observation, good question. All right, we're going to move on. Kind of changing gears here from those first couple reports are about level gains and post-test and that kind of thing. And now we're just going to look at some of the reports that help us look at how our attendance is going. And the first one is something called the 5-year monthly hours comparison. And I think it's listed on the report as the 5 years attendance, site 5-year attendance. And when you run this, again, it's going to default to starting with this current program year, which will be on the bottom row, actually. And then it shows all the previous year's attendance chunked out by month. So I know this has been particularly useful the last few years when we had that obviously huge disruption with attendance because of COVID and how programs are trying to work to get their students back, their classes running. So you can see and you can compare month to month whether you have more hours than the previous year all the way back for 5 years. And this will automatically run for your whole site, but you can also narrow down to subsites. So hopefully you're using that in your programming and in your planning. And in fact, I wanted to pause for a second to show you how the program of Metro North uses some of this data and how they then take the data from SiD and make their own documents about how to compare data by year, by building. So this is something that Linda and Metro North puts together, where she then takes that info and she takes the info, this is from the level gain report, and she compares over the years. She looks at how many students are enrollees every year. She types that into this so she can compare how many are participants. Again, so you're going to run that first of all your enrollees and then run it again with just participants. How many have more than 40 hours, and start looking at her subgroups of students and comparing them year to year. So I think that was sort of a useful tool that Linda had developed, and she made that available to any program who wants to take a look, to copy or just be motivated by. And then she made another report that compares, then she breaks down all the different buildings over here. So if you have a site that has a lot of different buildings, she likes to then, she can take the hours and compares them building by building to see which programs have the most classes, most hours, et cetera. Where do they maybe need attention to be promoting some of the classes, that kind of thing. I thought that was useful. So I believe Mary put both links to those documents in our chat. And thank you to Linda, who's in a different session, but said that I could share those with you all. Okay, another report that I wanted to draw attention to, which I think has a lot of great little detailed demographic info about your students, but we kind of don't draw a lot of attention to it all the time. So one is called the Program Summary Report, and this report has several pages, and it's a lot of the basic demographic info about your students, So the race, ethnicity, age groups, how many students are in each of the age groups, gender breakdown, how many students are participants versus not participants, what were their ed levels when they first started ABE, work status, a lot of that stuff you ask at intake, that gets summarized here. So this I know can be useful for reporting out to maybe your community ed or your other funders and stuff. And then related to that report is something called the Program Summary Data Export. So this report, as you can see on this screenshot, we pretended to tear it apart because this report goes on and on and on and on all the way to the right for many, many rows. But what it does is it runs all the students within the date range. It's going to default to the program year. This one has like 3 years, which is funny. And then it's going to list all the students who have any hours in that date range, their name, their age, their hours, their race, ethnicity, their other demographic information, whether they're MFIP, whether they're low income, all that stuff. So if you ever need a really kind of more detailed breakdown, or if you like to take this info into Excel and make some of your own charts and graphs, this report is really useful for that. And again, it's called the Program Summary Data Export. And so on the list of reports in SiD, it's in the category of demographic reports. And actually all our reports can be exported into Excel, but this one is particularly probably useful because it's already subset into, or each row is already spelled out. But even the previous reports, the level gain and the conversion rate report also can be exported to Excel. Okay, I'm going to move along, keep talking about attendance-based reports. So this one I highlighted last time because we've gotten a few questions about this as we've gotten more and more back into really focusing on attendance, which, as you are aware, your hours of attendance directly are linked to how much funding you get. So it's very important you're paying attention to your attendance and whether teachers are taking attendance and they're taking it on time and it's looking accurate. So this report is listed kind of near the top on the page of all the various reports we have, and it's called the All Classes Headcount Report. And it's going to run all your classes in your whole program. You can select a subsite, and then it shows you every day of the month, and then how many people were given attendance for each one of those classes. So one thing you can spot on here, now, not all classes meet every single day. So you can look at this and say, okay, this class, wait a minute, this has some holes in it. Is that because they didn't meet that day, or did the teacher forget to take attendance that day? So some programs I know use this regularly to look to make sure they can eyeball and see, is attendance going in on time? Is it happening? But also you can compare maybe if you have classes that are about the same time and one class has hardly any attendance, the other has a lot of attendance, you can see, okay, we need to be either promoting this class or maybe we can merge a few classes. So it's good to get a bird's eye view of what's going on attendance-wise in your program. And this is a good one for that. And I believe it defaults when you run it to 1 month, but you can select a wider range if you want, date-wise. So that one's useful. And then a similar one is the daily attendance in all classes. So this is going to count the hours. Okay, so the previous one counted how many people, it's like the head count, and this one counts how many hours were generated for each one of those classes. So if you are looking at, okay, which of our classes do we have a lot of students accumulating a lot of hours, which classes aren't being attended as much, and this is going to translate directly to the kind of funding that the classes will generate, I guess. But also similarly useful to take a look to make sure attendance is being taken on a regular basis. Okay, and then here is another report that was new. Well, I guess it's been probably a few years, but I think it's kind of forgotten about, and it's called the Student Traffic in Classes. It's kind of a unique little niche kind of report, and it's also near the top on that reports page that lists all the reports. And what this does is it only runs for the information for 1 week worth of data because it's really crunching a lot of info. And you can do it for your whole site or a subsite, or this one you can even do for just a class. And it shows you how many students are attending in the different hour ranges of the day. Okay, so on this example, on Monday, there were 378 students total at this program. And you can see, well, in the morning, there's very few students, but this 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock time frame, there's a lot of students. There's a lot of students still in classes between 10 and 11, et cetera. In the afternoon, basically dies off. I think that's very common. And a lot of programs actually don't have afternoon programming, and then evening. And you can also see, okay, my Monday and Wednesday evenings get a lot of attendance, my Tuesdays and Thursdays don't, that kind of thing. So I think programs are able to look at this again to get a glance at where's our heavy attendance, which days do we need to promote, that kind of thing. Pretty useful. Okay. So those were the ones that I was highlighting that were all on that report tab. Again, those reports that are on the report tabs generally are run for your whole program, but a lot of them do have toggles so that you can run it just for a subsite or just for a specific class. But I also wanted to remind you that that tab, the report tab, isn't the only place where reports exist in SiD, but there are reports if you are looking at just one specific class. Now, if you're a teacher, you log into SiD and you usually just go to your attendance page of your class. So if I was a teacher of this GED 2 prep class, I go in, I'd be here on this attendance tab. This is what the screen looks like for a teacher. But if you click over here to this reports tab, then you're going to see a list of reports that are just there specific for your class. So sometimes I don't know how aware teachers are of this tab and the reports that are there, or how aware you might be as maybe a data person or a manager. Remember that these reports exist right there for your teachers so that they can run specifically for their class. So I just have a couple example screenshots of a couple of those. There's one, let's see, it's called the assessments bar chart, and that will pop up. This will list each of the students' names, which we've fuzzied out here, but it'll show the name and their most recent test. So you can kind of see where your students' scores are visually, which is kind of nice. This report also has a toggle that you can maybe select TABE. It's going to default, I think, to CASAS reading right off the bat, but then you can toggle and just, if this is a GED class, for example, that mostly has TABE, then you can toggle and look at TABE scores. We also have a student contact list on this report tab, which is going to list student names, contact info, language, address, etc. Just FYI, these are fake students from our sandbox, just so you know. We're not putting people's phone numbers on the internet. So just again, a reminder about additional reports that exist in SiD, and these ones are the class-based ones. Then we also have reports that are listed on the student summary screen. So if you go to a student's page, the first page you're going to see is the summary screen. And some places have a photo of the student, the name, address, their most recent tests, their schedule, some of their demographic info. At the bottom here are a handful of reports, and these reports are going to be just for specifically that student. So these are going to run data just on your student. And a couple of the reports that I think are useful, we have a test history that shows line graphs as well, just for the student. So it's not going to have their whole class of classmates. It's just going to have their tests over time. So this student took one in December a couple years ago, then last summer, then the fall after. And if this student has like a reading and a math and also a CASAS, they're all going to be there after each other here. There's this other useful report called attendance summary. And I remember when I worked with students or at a program, occasionally we would get a student wanted a history of all their attendance over the years. So that is, let me go back to the student, this one called attendance summary. That previous one, assessment graphs, is this one called assessment graphs. So the attendance summary, and this is something you can export to a spreadsheet. It lists all their classes over here, the years and months, and how many hours they accumulated over each of the months and the year totals. So that can be useful for students upon request. And finally, we have something called a student snapshot, which could be useful. Again, this is a fake student with a fake name, but it shows their name, contact info, some of their active history items that you have to ask about. They're like employment status, their disability, stuff you had put in at intake. Also some items that may have ended over the years, which classes they are currently in and what their attendance percentage is in that class. Goals that they might have. This, it's hard to see, but their class history over all the years. So this student's been around for a little while, but I've seen reports of students' class history, and that goes like to the second page. And it has the name of the class, the staff, and what dates they were in that class. And then below that is their testing history. And again, that's going to go through their entire test history. So kind of a useful snapshot of information about a student. And we're going to do one last activity. So I'm going to ask that you go run a report. And this time I'm going to like at least get 2 comments back. I want you to run a report from this session or something that you've never run before. Even if I didn't highlight it, you can just go look at that report tab and say, okay, what are some other interesting reports I've never bothered to look at? Most of them, we hope, we have given names that make sense. So you could take a look, do a report, and then come back. I'm going to just, yeah, we'll do a minute and a half. And then I want you to come back and type in what report you ran. And if it's something you've ever run before, or if it was something new to you, and what sort of interesting info did you find? So I'm going to give you a minute and a half. We're almost down to just a minute. Anybody have any success? We're about half a minute. I know I always like start talking before time is up. Anybody run an interesting report? Find any interesting findings? Anybody run one of the graph ones? Those are kind of fun. Anybody want to chime in? 5-month. Thank you, Tamara. Ran the 5-year monthly hour comparison. That one is good. I mean, we had such a crazy year a couple years ago that everything looks a little bonkers on there. Let's say, but it's nice to see. You can at a glance see if you're growing from previous years of the same months. Mark also ran it. You're up 40% from last year. That is awesome. Ana Luisa's really new to SiD and you love it. Okay, you're finding these amazing. Okay, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Any questions you have, feel free to email us as a newbie. I know this can all be kind of overwhelming. I like the monthly class attendance reports. Great, Noah. Glad to hear it. Assessment bar chart for my specific class. Oh, sorry, Cindy. Well, now you know it exists. Great, assessment graph test history. And you didn't know about the student reports on the summary page. Okay, that's great. Also, the one on the student report, there is one that's specifically for MFIP or job counselors. It's laid out in a way to show the attendance of students who have to report hours to like job counselors. That's also on the student page. Can't wait to show your teachers that. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, bummer you didn't know about them already, but I'm glad that's why we're having this session. Okay, that actually brings us to the end. That was a quick whirlwind. We've got a couple more minutes here, so if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat, or you can even unmute if you want to ask it. Always a reminder to go to our help center, mnade.zendesk. It's here listed on the last sheet here, our screen. And our email, as I mentioned, sidsupport@literacymn.org. That goes to both Mary and I, and we try to get back those like ASAP. I think we do a good job. And if you take some time now and kind of play around with some of the reports and you're seeing something you wish existed that doesn't exist, please ask. Please send us a request. And maybe sometimes people are looking for something they can't find and it does exist. It's in a report that maybe has a name that didn't make sense, or it's kind of deep piece of info and it's kind of oddball report or something. So sometimes people ask us for info and we're like, oh, check it out on the blah, blah report. But other times, like there might be new reports that we need to build. And if we think that there's a lot of need or interest in something you're asking about, we'll make a new report and publish that for everyone. Occasionally people ask us, I would like to get info that I can't pull from any of these reports, and we can do a one-time pool of data for you if it's not something that already exists. So please feel free to email with questions and requests. And as Marissa said in the chat, the next session starts at 2. So she has linked to the agenda so that you can get yourself back to that agenda. And then you can get ready to go to the next session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for those who were brave enough to chime in with some comments and chats. We always like to hear what people are thinking about and know what questions people have about all this. Great, Brenda. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you all. And I think, I know these meeting rooms get used by the next session, so we'll probably be kicked out of here in a minute.
Thanks so much for being here, everyone. And thanks to Jenny for the great presentation.
Thank you for hosting.
We'll see you at the next session.
That's
at
right.
2 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.